Hey, Colonel Sean. I saw this on Peter McKinnon's YouTube channel a couple months ago, and unfortunately it took me like a couple months to actually try it myself, but I did, and I posted it to my Instagram this morning and got a ton of questions on how to do it. And so I'll link to Peter McKinnon's video, but also here is my explanation with a couple tweaks on how to do steel wool photography. So first of all, what's actually happening in these pictures is pretty simple. It's a long exposure, and while this long exposure is happening, you're spinning around some steel wool that's on fire, and when steel wool burns, it sort of falls apart, and so the air in it makes the sparks shoot everywhere as you spin it, and so what you're seeing is steel wool spinning and all the sparks and debris that are shooting off of it, and on a long exposure, you can see the trail of each one of those pieces. So, how do you actually do it? It's not that hard, but be careful. This is fire. You're dealing with fire, and that's dangerous. And so do this with other people. Make sure that some of them are adults. Make sure you're doing this in a place where nothing can catch fire. Make sure you're doing this in a place that it's okay to do these things. Don't do this in the middle of a street downtown and expect not to get in trouble. Do this carefully and with planning. So the first thing you're gonna need to do this is steel wool. I used grade 0000, which is like the finest that they make. I find that it's so fine that it breaks up into pieces really easily. You don't have to spin it super hard. It floats in the air a little bit more and works really well. So I went with the super fine. I haven't tried it with the others. It may be cool, I don't know. The next thing you're going to need is an all metal whisk. Now it's very important that your whisk is all metal, and it's very important that you don't use your mother's whisk without her permission, because you're going to ruin this thing. The reason it has to be all metal is you're about to build a small fire inside of it, and if there's any pieces that aren't completely heat resistant, they're going to disintegrate on you, and it could explode while you do it or melt and come to pieces while you're spinning it, and that could be a problem. So make sure you've got a good, sturdy, all metal whisk. I had to go to 4 stores to actually find an all metal whisk last night. Next up, you're gonna need some rope or some chain. Since I was in Home Depot and buying the steel wool, I went ahead and got some really thin chain just so it is also completely heat resistant in case anything falls on it from the burning embers. It's not gonna just melt through some nylon rope or something like that. So I got some chain, but you can use whatever you want that's fire resistant to spin this whisk around. You'll need a lighter to actually get the steel wool caught on fire. I've seen a couple people use just a 9-volt battery, because if you touch it to steel wool, it puts a current through it and the steel wool can't handle it, so it ignites. But I saw those people sort of struggling to actually get that to work every time, so I bought a lighter. And then you need a camera. So if your camera is really good at sucking up light, it's not gonna take that long to expose a picture in low light. What I wanna do is take a while, because if this shot takes 2 seconds to get it all the light I need into the camera, that's not enough time to really spin the steel wool around and get sparks going everywhere. I want this thing to take 10, 15, 20 seconds to really let me spin a bunch and throw sparks all over the place for as long as I want. To make that happen, I'm using the A6500, which has a smaller sensor and much smaller pixels than the A7S II, and that lets me really take my time in getting this shot. And lastly, you're gonna want a tripod. You're gonna wanna set your camera on a tripod so that you can press the button and have your camera stay perfectly still while you do this whole 20-second thing. If you try to handhold this, you will have a very hard time and you won't enjoy your results. So here's how you do this. When you take the steel wool and light it on fire, when air moves through it, it's gonna start to really light up, and I'm gonna do this very carefully inside on top of this metal dish so that I don't ruin anything. But when I light it, you see it doesn't really flare up or anything, it just starts to disintegrate, but when you blow, it really starts to get big. So this is what's happening inside the whisk as you're spinning it around, and all those little things that are falling onto this little tray are shooting off into the sky. So again, be very careful when you do this because it's dangerous. So to actually set up your whisk, you want to take a pretty good chunk of steel wool, and it comes sort of pressed into pads when you pull it out of the packaging. And so you just want to spread it out a little bit, sort of pull it, yank it, tear it, so you make a little nest that has a lot more air in it. You don't want to have it be completely tightly packed. So really fluff this thing up And even if you pull it apart into different pieces, when you stuff it back together in a second, it's still gonna work fine and light itself even if it's broken. So you're gonna take as much as you want depending on how long you want it to go, and you're gonna take your whisk, you're gonna pull apart a little bit, and you're just gonna shove this stuff on inside. Make sure it fits around so you don't have any big gaps in your whisk. That way you're not losing large chunks of this as it goes. So when you're ready to take your picture, have somebody who's ready to start the exposure on the camera. Not yet. Light it simply with your lighter, and it's not gonna, the whole thing won't light up. Like you saw a second ago, it's just gonna slowly burn through. So when you light it, it's gonna look like just a tiny little bit is burning and it's not really, the whole thing's not caught on fire. Don't worry, it will. So you're gonna light it, get a little bit of flame going in there, and then you're gonna start spinning it. And that's when you wanna start your exposure, have your friend, have your partner, click start on the shutter, and then just start spinning this thing. It's really important to remember that as you're spinning this, sparks are gonna be shooting everywhere. And so you don't wanna spin it to where they're shooting directly onto your face. It's probably a good idea to throw on some sunglasses or eye protection just so that you don't get hot, molten steel in your eyeballs. Make sure you do this in a way where you understand that you're about to throw sparks everywhere. So do so. If it just rained, that's perfect. That's what when I did it last night, it had just rained for a little while. And so all the grass was wet, all the wood was wet. The risk was really, really low for a fire. Getting your camera settings right is very important. Making sure you do a couple of test shots without lighting your steel wool on fire will help you make sure that you have your background and your foreground properly exposed and that you're taking the right picture settings. What I'm typically using, I like the shallower depth of focus, so I'm using an aperture around 2.8, f2.8, but I may experiment with that a little bit tonight. I think I'm going out to do this, and it'll be more in maybe the 5.6 to 9 range, get a little bit more in focus. We're gonna shoot this around a creek, and so if I want more of that background in focus, I'm gonna raise that f-stop. And what that'll also do is make it easier to take a longer exposure picture. For shutter speed, last night I fell in love with about 15 seconds. That was enough time to do some full rotations to get sparks going absolutely everywhere and to have it all captured without being rushed. It let my circles be complete. It turned out really well at about 15 seconds. Tonight I'm gonna experiment with a little shorter, a little longer, see if there's something else I like in there. And the last thing is to make sure that your ISO is as low as possible. A lot of cameras have an automatic ISO setting, and if you shoot at night with an automatic ISO, your camera's probably gonna throw that number up pretty high and you're gonna end up with a lot of grain in your photo. The whole point of this photo is to leave your lens or your shutter open for as long as possible. So make sure you bring that ISO number down really, really low so that A, your sensor is less sensitive to light and therefore it takes longer, but B, you get a much, much crisper photo with far less noise. And so that's what you're going for, is a crisp, beautiful picture. And you do that by having a low ISO, having a higher shutter speed, and making sure that your depth of focus is right where you want it with the f-stop. And then to control the actual amount of light coming in, that's where your variable ND filter comes in. And you can see as I spin this, now you can see my face, now you can't see my face. So as I spin this, it determines how much light is coming in, and it's actually just two polarizers that are working against each other somehow. I don't fully understand it. But I'm gonna get all my camera settings right, and then based on the ambient light, I'm gonna use my neutral density filter to actually control the exposure of the photo. And that's really it. After you have your camera settings right and your whisk ready to go, you can really start to get creative. And I've seen a bunch of photos, and I'm excited to try some where you're spinning in just a circle, where maybe you draw a heart or some shape, or you spell something and you're throwing sparks all over the whole time. Do this underneath a bridge where the sparks can actually hit the outline of something around you. Do this behind something, in front of something. Really experiment and see what you could do when you're painting with light and painting with fire around some subject. If you do some of these and you post them to Instagram, tag me because I'd love to see them. Throw my name in a comment or something like that, and I'll find them. And I think it'd be really cool to see what other people are doing. But make sure, again, that you do this carefully. This is dangerous. Do it carefully. That's it. I'm Colonel Sean. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. to make a whole bunch of sparks. But if you can make this thing take 10 or 15 seconds, you can spin a ton in there and get a ton of sparks going everywhere. Who's texting me? You're ruining the shot. Oh, it's Jesse. Hi, Jesse. You're in DC right now. I was just in DC.